Video games are a form of entertainment I think all of us can enjoy, whether it be first-person shooters, RPGs, strategy games, horror games, or simulators. I think there's something for everyone with video games due to the large amount of game genres that there are. Due to the large amount of video game genres and just the general large amount of video games in general, some video games will tend to either go missing or just not make it out of the drawing board. So that's why, today, I'll be talking about 8 lost more video games. Since this video serves as a sequel to my video from July of 2022, 10 lost video games. So with all that being said, let's start this thing. In 2007, Farside Studios began work on a game based on the Peanuts franchise, which would star Charlie Brown. The game is also based on the 1966 TV special titled Charlie Brown's All-Stars. The game would share the same name as the 1966 TV special and was supposed to be a baseball-themed game that was set to be produced by Namco Bandai Games and was supposed to be playable on the PS2, original Xbox, Wii, and PSP. The plot of the game is based on the 1966 TV special and follows Charlie Brown meeting his friend Linus after losing a baseball game, in which Linus introduces Charlie Brown to Mr. Hennessy, who is the operator of a local hardware store and is willing to help Charlie Brown and his team finally succeed in their baseball endeavors. The game would feature up to 70 characters from the Peanuts franchise, with 30 of those characters being announced, as well as maps based on the Peanuts franchise, such as Lucy's Field, Snoopy's Field, Schultz Field, and Pigpen Field. The game would also feature 4-party games that would reflect baseball positions, such as batting, fielding, and pitching. The game also apparently featured a Simon Says-inspired game called Lucy Says, but not much is known about this minigame. The game would be printed on the back of the instruction manual for the 2006 Farside Studios game Snoopy and the Red Baron, with a promised release date of 2007, but this would never materialize. The main reason why the game was cancelled was due to the fact that Farside Studios would be working on a large amount of games but lacked the staff to actually create the large quantity of games, which led to the studio having to scrap certain games, one of which being Charlie Brown's All-Stars. Not much from the game has resurfaced aside from the ad on the Snoopy and the Red Baron instruction manual, some photos of the game, and around 1 minute of footage on YouTube. In 1994, Sega would begin work on a game for the new console, the Sega Saturn, based on their flagship Sonic the Hedgehog series. The game was intended to be the first 3D Sonic game and would be called Sonic X-treme. Initially, Sonic X-treme was going to be a side-scrolling successor to the game Sonic & Knuckles, and was intended to be released on the Sega Genesis. But the game shifted gears as it was instead changed to be an exclusive with the 32X add-on for the Genesis, but this would again be changed due to the poor sales of the 32X. Sonic X-treme would eventually shift gears to be an exclusive for Sega's new Sega Saturn console, which was released in Japan in late 1994. The layout of the game was split into 2 different layouts, with one being in a fisheye lens and the other being the layout for the boss battles, which had an arena type layout in which the player would have free roam capabilities. The boss battles were unique as the bosses were created with polygons, whilst the rest of the game sprites would be 3D models. Some of the bosses that were planned to be in the game include Fang the Sniper and Metal Sonic. The game was also intended to have up to 4 playable characters, including Tails, who would have a flight game mode which would be in first person, Knuckles, who would have sections with an overhead camera, and also the ability to play as Amy Rose and Tiara Bubowski in the same fisheye lens as Sonic. The plot of the game changed over time, with one plot involving Tiara Bubowski and her father, Professor Gazebo, calling on Sonic to defend the 6 magical rings of order from Dr. Eggman, whilst another plot involved a monster named Chaos getting trapped inside the Chaos Emerald. The game started production in 1994 and had a set release date of late 1996, but was quickly met with many issues. For instance, Sega of America was put in charge of the production for Sonic X-treme, but the American Sega division wasn't used to the Sega Saturn technology and had to learn the whole technology within a year and a half. What didn't help the already troubled production of the game was constant infighting and politicking between programmers, artists, engineers, Sega of America, and Sega of Japan between each other. By early 1996, the game was already behind schedule due to how disorganized the production of the game was and due to the constant infighting within Sega. This caused many developers to dedicate unhealthy amounts of time to creating the game, with some people even temporarily moving into the Sega offices to finish the game. This unhealthy amount of dedication to the game's production literally caused 2 of the game's most important people, designer Chris Sen and programmer Chris Coffin, to become gravely ill. Due to the declining health of 2 of the game's most important people, as well as the late 96 deadline creeping up, Sega ultimately decided to cancel Sonic X-treme. Since Sega still needed a flagship game for their Sega Saturn, Sega would ultimately decide to release a port of the Sega Genesis game Sonic 3D Blast and would also release Sonic R in 1997 on the Saturn, with both of these releases being the main Sonic games on the Saturn. The game would have a playable demo at E3 in 1996, which was the main available media from the game until 2015, in which someone got their hands on the source code for the E3 version of the game and released the build that same year. This game has so much lore that it deserves its own video. For example, there is supposed to be a movie tie-in for the game, but all that remains from this ambitious game is the E3 demo. In 1994, Rare would start production on an RPG that was intended to release on the Super Nintendo. This RPG would center around a fairy tale theme, with the plot revolving around a boy named Edson, his girlfriend Madeline, and Edson's pets, Dinger the dog and Billy the parrot, setting off on a journey to fight a gang of pirates who were led by Captain Buckeye and his gang, which includes Flintlock Jock and Grim Jim. Production on the game started around 1994 through 1995, which was led by the same team that made Donkey Kong Country, with the game having the working title Dream: The Land of Giants, with the intention of releasing the game on the Super Nintendo. This version of the game mixed RPG mechanics with LucasArts point-and-click adventure elements. When this version of the game was previewed, it was described as incredibly beautiful and innovative, being a big step up from Donkey Kong Country, but this version of the game would get scrapped due to the fact that the game was becoming too ambitious for the SNES and it was taking a long time to create. Due to the ambitious nature of the game would ultimately continue production as an N64 game. In addition to this change, it would be decided that the game would be a full 3D RPG, abandoning many of the side-scrolling mechanics from the SNES version. This era of the game's development would also expand on the ambitious nature of the SNES version of the game, with many beautiful landscapes being made, but testing this version of the game caused many performance issues on the N64. Due to the performance issues that occurred, the devs decided to use the same technology that was being used to create Super Mario 64 due to the fact that it was easier to do. Also, the plot of the game was changed at this time, instead to have the main protagonist as an anthropomorphic bear. This bear would slowly become the character you may know as Banjo-Kazooie. Also, the RPG concept got abandoned, instead being replaced with a platformer. Project Dream would eventually become the iconic 1998 platformer, Banjo-Kazooie. The public would never learn about Project Dream until 2006, in which Rare mentioned it in a Q&A segment, and would be mentioned again in 2007 in a Retro Gamer magazine. In December of 2015, Rare would upload a video discussing the story of Project Dream to their YouTube channel, which discussed the history of the game's development and also provided the public with never-before-seen gameplay footage of the game. And in 2023, Tim Stamper, one of the founders of Rare, would upload footage of the intro cutscene for the N64 build. And as of 2025, all that remains of Project Dream are some unused parts of the game, such as the soundtrack, which would contribute tracks to other Nintendo games, such as Banjo-Tooie, Donkey Kong 64, and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, some screen caps of the Super Nintendo build for the game, as well as some screen caps and footage for the N64 build. In 2006, Pandemic Studios began production on a game meant to coincide with the 2008 film The Dark Knight. The development of the game was handled by Pandemic's Australian branch, Pandemic Brisbane, with the running title Batman Dark Knight. Production was already off to a bad start due to the fact that Pandemic didn't have any material about the actual Dark Knight movie to go off of. So Pandemic was essentially creating concepts for the game from scratch, mostly basing them off the Batman Begins video game from 2005, as well as PS2 hardware. But once the devs started to get informed about the concepts from the film, they would repurpose the work they already had made, which included the game being an open-world game centering around Gotham. Around this time, the devs would start using the Odin game engine, which Pandemic had started using for their other in-production game, Saboteur. Eventually, the devs would start importing a large amount of their already existing work, which is created with the PS2 technology, into the Odin engine. But problems would soon arise. When importing things like a Batman model, background characters, or HDR lighting, the game would experience extreme framerate drops or would just outright crash. This causes development to slog down, which caused Pandemic to push back the initial release date of the game, being in July of 2008 to coincide with the theatrical release of The Dark Knight, to December of 2008, which is the home media release of the film. To speed up production, Pandemic would hire contractors to help out the current devs, but this would ultimately prove to be fruitless. Pandemic came to their senses and decided to cancel the game in October of 2008, due to the fact that the game was still incredibly unfinished. This cancellation would have rippling effects. Firstly, it caused Pandemic Brisbane to shut down in early 2009, which preluded Pandemic as a whole permanently shutting down. Canceling the game costed EA who were set to publish the game, a loss of an estimated $100 million in potential revenue, and it caused The Dark Knight to be the only Batman film with no video game tie-in. All that remains of this game are some production photos and a video on YouTube which showcases a large amount of assets from the game. Plants vs. Zombies was released in 2009, but the development and conception of the game started way before 2009. In the early 2000s, game designer George Fan would start making concepts for an intended sequel to the 2001 game Insane Aquarium. This planned sequel was supposed to be a tower defense game in which the player would defend a top and bottom fish tank from aliens. But it's not entirely known if anything serious was made from this era, besides some concept art. Production and concepts for this game would eventually evolve into a 2005 demo called Weedlings. The Weedlings demo is roughly when the idea for Plants vs. Zombies started, with the demo featuring plants shooting at the alien characters from Insane Aquarium. In 2006, another demo called the Insane Aquarium Deluxe started to resemble Plants vs. Zombies much more compared to Weedlings. This build features character designs roughly resembling those in the final Plants vs. Zombies game, such as the pea shooter, sunflower, and the brown coat wearing zombies. In addition to these characters, this build also featured the lawnmower system, which initially used a laser as its placeholder. After this build, the demos from 2007 to 2009 started to morph into what we know as Plants vs. Zombies, with working titles such as Lawn of the Dead and Bloom and Doom. From the demos that were created, we have a 2009 build that resembles the final game, and also a 2008 demo called Bloom and Doom, which closely resembles the final game. Whilst for the other builds, all we have are screenshots. In 2012, 20th Century Fox collaborated with Roadhouse Interactive and Acronym Games to create an online MMO based on Family Guy, which would be called Family Guy Online. The game released in 2012 and would have characters from Family Guy who would be assigned character classes. For example, Stewie, Peter, Lois, and Chris and Meg, who are one class, and a planned Brian class. After choosing their class, players would create their own character which would be dropped into the Family Guy world. In addition to this, the currency used in the game would be cash and clams, with clams being earned by completing in-game objectives and could be used to buy items in the in-game shop. The game would have also utilized open world elements due to the fact that players could walk around the Griffin house and throughout the city of Quahog, and also since the game used the Unity as its engine. The beta of the game was released in 2012 to the public, but in December of 2012, it was announced that the game would be shut down by early 2013, mostly due to the fact that the game wasn't very financially profitable. Over the years, a decent amount of content has resurfaced from this game, such as someone finding 2,600 files from the game and a large amount of gameplay footage existing. But due to the fact that this is an online game, it's very unlikely that any of the devs have an offline version of the game saved. And as of today, this game remains lost. In 1996, Namco began work on a 3D platformer for the Pac-Man series, which is going to be the first 3D Pac-Man game and went under the title Pac-Man Ghost Zone. The plot of the game would follow a kid getting sucked into a Pac-Man arcade machine by the ghosts and the Ghost Lord after the kid would insult them. The game would then follow the kid becoming Pac-Man and having to take on the Ghost Lord to escape the arcade machine. The game would have had 14 worlds and would have used tank controls to control Pac-Man, which greatly differed from your average 3D platformer at the time, such as Crash Bandicoot. A demo was made for the game that was shown at E3 1997 and was presented to the president of Namco. The demo was received pretty poorly due to the fact that it was only made in 2 weeks. Due to this negative reaction, the development schedule for the game was halved. Another meeting with the Namco president caused the majority of the game's development team to get fired, which ultimately led to the game's cancellation. The production hell behind this game is so long and complicated that I had to give the Cliff Notes version for the length of this video. From the ashes of Pac-Man Ghost Zone would be 1999's Pac-Man World, which would serve as the first 3D Pac-Man platformer. And as of 2025, all that remains of Pac-Man Ghost Zone is some game footage, promotional art, and game assets. In 2008, Vicarious Visions would start production on a Call of Duty game, but this planned Call of Duty game would differ drastically tonally and gameplay-wise from the majority of the franchise. This game would be called Call of Duty Roman Wars. The title alone should tell you why this game would differ so much from the traditional Call of Duty games, as the majority of the Call of Duty games take place in either the 20th or 21st century, whilst this game would take place in the 1st century BC in ancient Rome. The plot of the game would mostly center around Julius Caesar and his 10th Legion, following a soldier in the 10th Legion. The plot of the game loosely followed the Commentarii de Bello Gallicio, which was Julius Caesar's commentary that centered around his military encounters with Celtic and Germanic tribes in the region of Gaul in modern-day France. Players would have had the ability to rise through the ranks and take on multiple different roles in the 10th Legion, such as the lead centurion, a grunt, and even a commander role as Julius Caesar himself. The game planned to have many different settings to fight in, such as being able to fight on sea, in a coliseum, in forests, and on plains. The game would have been in first and third person POV, and the fighting had a heavy focus on sword and shield melee combat, with the ability to also use bows, axes, and spears, with there also being a planned feature that would have allowed players to blind their enemies by throwing sand in their eyes. A demo sequence was made for the game that revolved around the Battle of Alesia, in which Julius Caesar would lead the 10th Legion into a siege. This demo showcases much of the fighting in the game, and several unique features, such as the ability to ride horses, catapults, archer towers to exchange fire with enemies, and the ability to ride an elephant that would serve as the game's tank. The elephant would allow players to attack and take cover from enemies, while the elephant would trample enemies. Another demo sequence was made which took place in a coliseum, which was in first-person POV, and showed off much of the sword and shield fighting that was prevalent throughout the game. The game was first conceived when Activision put out a call to action aimed at game studios to pitch a Call of Duty game. Vicarious Visions would then conceive of the idea of Call of Duty Roman Wars, which had a planned release date of 2013 and was planned to release on the Xbox 360 and PS3, but also could have been released on the Xbox One and PS4 due to the fact that the release date was around the release of those consoles. Activision liked the idea of the game, but they didn't want to attach the Call of Duty name to it due to how different it was compared to the rest of the series. This would ultimately lead to the downfall of the game, as Vicarious insisted on the Call of Duty name, which eventually led to the game getting cancelled. All that remains of Call of Duty Roman Wars are 2 demos and some material that was made to pitch the game to Activision.